In many suburban communities, homeowners associations, HOAs, serve as governing bodies that help maintain property values and foster community standards. These organizations typically have specific rules and regulations designed to uphold the neighborhood's aesthetic appeal, regulate common areas, and ensure that residents comply with certain guidelines. This is often a double-edged sword. While HOAs can cultivate a sense of order and belonging, their authority can also escalate into overreach, creating conflicts between residents and the association. In our community, the HOA had been seen as a traditional authority. They organized events, managed landscaping for communal spaces, and were responsible for enforcing rules related to property modifications. However, their tight grip on regulations started to feel more controlling than supportive. Neighbors whispered about seemingly trivial complaints being pursued with zeal, well-kept lawns were scrutinized under a magnifying glass, and various disturbances prompted strict enforcement of noise regulations. It was an unspoken understanding that living in harmony meant adhering to the HOA's rules without question. As I navigated my daily life amid this structured environment, I had always ensured my property complied with the stated rules until the day the HOA declared my pool too large. This seemingly small grievance quickly spiraled into a confrontation that would uncover complexities I never imagined existed within our community framework. Little did I know that beneath this dispute lay another surprising truth about property ownership, the ownership of the water supply itself, and how it would shift everything I thought I knew about community governance. It all started with a formal letter from the HOA, delivered to my mailbox one crisp morning. The envelope, embossed with the association's logo, carried an unmistakable air of authority. I opened it with a mix of curiosity and dread, only to find a complaint regarding my pool, specifically its size. The letter claimed that my pool exceeded the maximum allowable dimensions outlined in the community bylaws, which stipulated that no private pool could measure more than 600. My heart sank as I reread those lines, particularly noting the phrase "neighbors have expressed concerns" that felt like a veiled threat. The HOA cited Section 4 of their regulations, which detailed restrictions on property modifications intended to ensure uniformity and maintain the community's aesthetic appeal. Ironically, I had always been compliant. I had followed every rule regarding landscaping and exterior changes meticulously. Yet here I stood, facing a predicament that seemed rooted in subjective opinion rather than fact. To add fuel to the fire, the letter warned of potential fines or even legal action if I failed to rectify the situation within. What startled me most was the sudden shift in my once peaceful existence into a battleground for compliance. As I pondered my options, I couldn't help but wonder who had taken issue with my pool in the first place and why it had escalated to this point. Little did I know that this confrontation would be just the beginning of unraveling a much larger mystery surrounding my ownership rights. As news of the HOA's complaints spread throughout the neighborhood, reactions among my neighbors varied widely. Some expressed sympathy, while others seemed relieved it wasn't their property under scrutiny. During a casual gathering at the local park, I overheard snippets of conversation that revealed a mix of support and resentment. "It's about time someone held them accountable," one neighbor exclaimed, while another remarked, "I always thought those regulations were too strict anyway." Conversely, there were those who sided with the HOA, arguing that maintaining community standards was crucial for everyone's property values. A few residents even approached me directly, voicing concerns about how my pool's size could set a precedent for future builds in the area. I sensed an underlying tension. What began as an isolated complaint had morphed into a divisive issue. Despite the polarized opinions, several neighbors offered their support, sharing stories about their own struggles with the HOA. They recounted instances when they felt pressured by petty rules or faced harassment for minor infractions. It became clear that many residents held a shared frustration with the association's overreach, even if they didn't openly voice it. Encouraged by this newly found camaraderie, I began to formulate a plan to challenge the HOA's claims. The conversation shifted from mere gossip to proactive discussions about rights and ownership. As I navigated these complex social dynamics, I realized that my fight would not only impact me, but could also resonate with others longing for change in our community governance. In the midst of my growing frustrations with the HOA, I decided to dive deeper into my property records, hoping to fortify my defense against their escalating complaints. As I pored over the documents, something strange caught my eye. Not only did I own my home and its surrounding land, but I also held rights to the water supply that serviced our neighborhood. The revelation struck me like a thunderbolt. This information was buried in the fine print of a deed from years past, detailing provisions for water access granted to individual homeowners. To clarify this unexpected finding, I reached out to local officials at the municipal office and scheduled a meeting to discuss the community's water rights. During our conversation, an enthusiastic clerk guided me through the historical context of how the water supply was organized within our neighborhood. Most people don't realize they have ownership rights, she noted, her tone both amused and encouraging. With each piece of information I absorbed, it became clear that my situation wasn't just about a pool. It involved a fundamental misunderstanding of property ownership and community resource management. As I left the office, clutching copies of relevant documentation, a weight began lifting off my shoulders. This newfound knowledge was not merely empowering, it positioned me as more than just an aggrieved homeowner. I had become an unwitting steward of a critical resource in our community. The implications for my ongoing battle with the HOA were monumental. Armed with this discovery, I felt ready to redefine the narrative around my property rights and challenge their authority on much firmer ground. With the newfound knowledge of owning the water supply, I began to delve into the legal implications that accompanied this unexpected responsibility. The rights I held were outlined clearly in the deed, granting me access and usage rights over the water that fed not only my property, but also others in the neighborhood. However, with these rights came a host of obligations I had never considered before. I learned that ownership entailed maintaining the infrastructure associated with the water supply, ensuring it remained functional and safe for community use. This meant I could be held liable for any issues arising from its management, whether it was addressing leaks, maintaining the quality of the water, or even ensuring proper distribution to nearby homes. The potential for liability weighed heavily on my mind, but it also empowered me. Possessing such rights meant I had leverage against the HOA. Consulting with a local attorney specialized in property law further clarified my position. They explained that claiming ownership of the water supply not only strengthened my case against the HOA, but also opened doors to assert my influence in local governance. I could potentially propose new regulations or modifications to existing ones, especially those I found overly restrictive. This perspective shift was monumental. The HOA's complaints about my pool size now seemed trivial compared to my newfound standing as a steward of a community resource. Armed with this legal insight, I felt ready to confront the association, not just as a homeowner, but as an active participant in the governance of our neighborhood. The stakes had risen, and I was determined to navigate this complex landscape assertively. Equipped with a newfound sense of purpose, I embarked on a thorough investigation into the HOA's regulations and bylaws, eager to understand the extent of their power and my rights as a homeowner. Late nights were spent poring over dense legal documents I had obtained from the HOA's website and local municipal office. I meticulously analyzed the community bylaws, highlighting sections that referenced property modifications, common areas, and the enforcement of rules. As I sifted through page after page of legalese, I came across references to state laws governing HOAs, which outlined their authority and limitations. I discovered that while they had the right to enforce rules to maintain community standards, there were checks on their authority, especially regarding property ownership. It was clear that many homeowners felt burdened by regulations that sometimes seemed arbitrary. This resonated with my experience, fueling my determination to advocate for reasonable guidelines. In my research, I reached out to neighbors who had navigated similar disputes. They shared their own battles with the HOA, revealing loopholes and weaknesses in their enforcement strategies. One neighbor even pointed me toward a local organization that assists homeowners in understanding their rights. With each discovery, I began drafting a comprehensive overview of the points I intended to raise during my upcoming confrontation with the HOA. As I pieced together information about their powers and the broader context of community governance, I felt a mix of trepidation and excitement. It was time to challenge the association not just for myself, but for everyone who felt stifled by its rigid oversight. Feeling prepared and emboldened by my research, I scheduled a meeting with the HOA leadership to address the complaints regarding my pool and to clarify the implications of owning the water supply. I knew that many members of the board were well-intentioned but often lacked a broader perspective on individual homeowners' rights and community resources. As I entered the meeting room, I was met with wary expression. The atmosphere felt tense, but I focused on staying calm and methodical in my approach. I introduced my points clearly. I acknowledged their concerns about the pool size, but emphasized that my research had viewed a multitude of regulations that seemed inadequately enforced or understood. The members listened intently as I laid out how my ownership of the water supply granted me significant responsibility, potentially altering the dynamics of our discussions. I brought copies of relevant documents, including excerpts from the community bylaws and state statutes that underscored my rights as a property owner. I believe we could work together to find solutions rather than impose penalties, I suggested, hoping to foster collaboration instead of conflict. Interestingly, during our discussion, I noticed a shift in their demeanor. Some members appeared contemplative rather than defensive, particularly when I mentioned that excessive restrictions might drive residents away, ultimately affecting property values, all of which we shared an interest in protecting. By the end of the meeting, although a resolution was not reached, there was a palpable acknowledgement that dialogue was necessary going forward. I left feeling that I had made strides in changing the conversation around our community's regulations and fostering a more cooperative spirit among us. With the dialogue between the HOA and myself opening up, I knew it was time to rally my neighbors and gather support for the cause. I organized a small gathering at my home, inviting residents who had expressed their concerns about the HOA's stringent regulations. I prepared an agenda that highlighted the issues we faced collectively, from arbitrary complaints to the need for more transparent governance. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere shifted from tentative to passionate. Neighbors shared their own stories of frustration, including one woman who had been fined for painting her front door a shade too vibrant for the HOA's liking. This camaraderie cemented our resolve, and we brainstormed ways to present our collective grievances effectively. Together, we decided to form a committee to address our concerns in a unified manner. I suggested that we draft a petition outlining our desire for a more balanced approach to community regulation. Each neighbor contributed their thoughts, and we quickly amassed signatures from nearly half the residents in our area. We also agreed to attend the next HOA meeting as a united front. Armed with our petition and personal testimonies, we planned to introduce changes that would encourage more flexibility in enforcing rules. Our goal was to advocate not just for my pool but for fair treatment of all homeowners. As news of our mobilization spread, I felt a wave of empowerment wash over me. It was no longer just about defending my property. It was about fostering a community spirit that valued collaboration and mutual respect. With renewed determination, I realized we were ready to challenge the HOA together, making our voices heard in ways that resonated beyond my individual dispute. As our mobilization gained momentum, the consequences of challenging the HOA quickly became evident. Division within the community began to surface, with some residents feeling uneasy about the shift in dynamics. Supporters of the HOA who believed in strict adherence to regulations worried that our actions would lead to chaos and a breakdown of order. Tensions sparked as arguments erupted at neighborhood meetings, where discussions about property rights and community standards clashed. On one side, those rallying for change felt empowered and united. On the other, staunch supporters of the HOA maintained that any deviation from established rules could undermine property value. Some residents even received anonymous letters warning them against signing our petition, creating an atmosphere of suspicion and fear. These threats only intensified my resolve, but also highlighted the delicate balance we were trying to maintain within our community. The HOA responded by tightening their grip on enforcement. They began issuing warnings for minor infractions across the board, leading many homeowners to feel targeted. This retaliatory approach caused further unrest. Homeowners who had previously supported the HOA began reconsidering their stance as they witnessed friends being penalized for trivial matters. Despite these challenges, our committee remained determined to foster dialogue rather than hostility. We organized forums where participants could voice their concerns without judgment, aiming to mend fences between neighbors torn by differing opinions. While the road ahead was fraught with complications, it was clear that our dispute had catalyzed a necessary conversation about community governance, a dialogue that would shape how we coexisted moving forward. After weeks of tension and negotiation, the time finally came for a pivotal meeting between the HOA, community representatives, and myself to address the pool dispute and clarify ownership of the water supply. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation as we gathered in the community center, a stark reminder of how far we had come together. I had prepared meticulously, bringing all relevant documentation to support our case, including the petition and testimonials from neighbors who shared their grievances. The HOA board members arrived with a cautious demeanor, likely aware that their authority had been challenged. As discussions progressed, it became clear that while they remained committed to enforcing regulations, there was a growing recognition of the need for flexibility. I presented our argument that the strict interpretation of the pool size regulation was not only unfair, but also detrimental to community morale. In an unexpected turn, one of the board members proposed a compromise. They would allow me to keep my pool as long as it met specific aesthetic guidelines and did not exceed a revised size limit. Additionally, they agreed to collaborate on creating clearer guidelines for future modifications, ensuring that homeowners had a voice in the decision-making process. This was a significant victory for our community. The discussions also led to an agreement on clarifying ownership responsibilities regarding the water supply, which would help mitigate future conflicts. As I left the meeting, I felt a profound sense of relief and achievement. Not only had we resolved the issues surrounding my pool, but we had also paved the way for a more equitable governance structure that respected homeowners' rights. This resolution marked a new chapter in our neighborhood, a shift toward collaboration rather than contention. Reflecting on this experience, I realized just how pivotal it was in shaping my understanding of property rights and community governance. Initially, the whole affair felt overwhelming, filled with the fear of authority wielding its power over me and other residents. However, as I navigated the complexities of the HOA's regulations and engaged with my neighbors, I discovered the profound importance of standing up for one's rights. I learned that knowing the law is crucial. Understanding property rights not only empowered me as an individual homeowner, but also equipped me to advocate for others in similar situations. Educating myself about bylaws and state regulations revealed the limitations of the HOA's authority, allowing me to push back against arbitrary rules that did not serve the greater good. Moreover, this journey highlighted the significance of community solidarity. The strength we found while uniting to address shared grievances made it clear that change could only happen if we collectively faced our challenges. Through open dialogue and collaboration, we fostered a spirit of cooperation that had been lacking before. Ultimately, this experience taught me to view authority not as an insurmountable barrier, but as something that must be challenged when it becomes overreaching. It was an invaluable lesson in civic engagement and empowerment, demonstrating that when individuals come together to assert their rights, they can effect real change. Looking forward, I feel more capable and confident in participating in my community, advocating not just for myself, but for all who believe in fairness and equity in governance. In conclusion, this journey has underscored the critical importance of understanding local regulations and advocating for oneself within a community setting. My experience with the HOA taught me that property rights are not merely legal concepts, but vital tools that empower residents to challenge authority when necessary. Engaging with the rules and learning about my rights transformed what initially felt like an overwhelming conflict into an opportunity for growth and advocacy. Understanding the intricacies of community governance is essential. It fosters informed citizens who can actively participate in discussions about local policies and regulations. This knowledge not only benefits individual homeowners but also strengthens the entire community, creating a culture of collaboration and support. Moreover, mobilizing neighbors around shared concerns highlighted the power of collective action. When residents unite to address common grievances, they can effect meaningful change that resonates throughout their neighborhood. This experience reinforced the idea that standing up against overreaching authority can lead to a more equitable and transparent governance structure. As I move forward, I feel equipped not just to defend my rights but also to encourage others to engage in civic matters. The lessons learned from this dispute extend beyond my personal situation. They serve as a reminder that every homeowner has a voice that matters. By remaining vigilant, informed, and engaged, we can cultivate communities that prioritize fairness and responsiveness in governance, ensuring that everyone's rights are respected and upheld for years to come.